Thank you for joining in. This is FireWorks. Now, the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission is Nigeria's big gun at the forefront of its efforts to promote equity for consumers and also create a level playing field for competition. The Commission describes itself as being established by law to promote fair, efficient and competitive markets in Nigeria. That's the Nigerian economy, and facilitate access by all citizens to safe products, and also to secure the protection of rights for all consumers in Nigeria. But with the offices in only 9 out of 36 states in the country, including the FCT, as listed on the website, it is perhaps easy to see why consumer rights violation still continues like a viral epidemic, and why fair competition appears to be a luxury many businesses find difficult to afford. Now, you may have heard about the pharmacy in Port Harcourt that increased the price of the drug, hydroxychloroquine, by as much as 400 times its original price. There's probably very little reason to wonder why such unbridled exploitation was afoot in the first place. These are desperate times for many people, and even the cheapest of drugs touted to have a cure will find its way to the top of the price list. That some Nigerian businesses could be perpetuating this level of opportunism and exploitation appears to be a familiar song many can do nothing about. But it just might be not hope. Hope might just be at the end of the tunnel. Hope is not lost. Yes, that's what we're going to be discussing today, right here on FireWorks. My guest is Mr. Babatunde Irukere. He is the Director General of the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission. He is a politician and also a lawyer. We will be talking in a moment. Give us a moment. Welcome back. So like I did say earlier on, my guest is the Director General of the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, in the person of Mr. Babatunde Irukere. Thank you so much for joining in. It's good to have you here.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed. So there's so much on your plate. There's so much you're dealing with right now, especially with hydroxychloroquine in the works. Now, one of the restrictive agreements, or the agreement part of the Commission's explanatory memorandum, says, out of the many, it says, maintenance of minimum resale prices, prohibition of minimum resale price maintenance. What does that mean, or what do these mean, and how do they apply to what we have right now regarding the hydroxychloroquine that has the price off the roofs?
And so thank you. Although a minimum resale price is more of a consumer protection issue, and what it really suggests is that you're creating a flaw, and it's a price fixing mechanism which typically distorts competition. A fair marketplace is such that operators would use the best innovation to save cost, lower their cost of operation, and use the best of their creativity to secure the custom of consumers. And so when you create a mandatory price floor, what you're doing is discouraging that innovation, and you're in some sense eliminating the best possible choices consumers can have. And so there is something that is allowed. And so for instance, you'd see on your Coke bottle or on the Coke trucks, 100 naira per bottle.
Yes.
That is not a minimum resale price. That is not a price that is being dictated by the producer or the manufacturer. That is an MSRP, which is suggested, manufacturer's suggested retail price. So, but statutorily or legally creating a sale price, a minimum sale price, is potentially problematic. Now, it doesn't mean that a minimum price is not sometimes appropriate, because one of the things that happens one of the things we look out for in competition regulation is when a big player, maybe cross subsidies or other types of subsidies, in a bid to chase others out, engages in what you call predatory pricing, which is when you can floor the prices below cost so that others can survive in that market. And when they're out, you can now control the market. And so there is some sense where there is a minimum resale price mechanism, but it is not something that is created statutorily that allows for operators not to engage in the fiercest possible competition for the custom of consumers.
So how would this play with what we have going on right now with COVID-19, the hydroxychloroquine? Since it came up as a possible cure, the price had seen a tremendous rise, from what one can easily afford to what it is now that is beyond reach. I mean, we're talking 50,000 naira.
So that is price gouging. And price gouging really means it's a variant of profiteering, meaning that it's opportunistic advantage taken. Essentially, there's a shock to the market. There's an unusual basis or circumstantial situation that artificially inflates demand. And you now take advantage of that to price in a manner that is inconsistent with the fair market. And so there are a few words that would describe what that conduct is. It would be unjust, it would be obnoxious, it would be exploitative, it would be unconscionable, it would be unreasonable, it would be manifestly so.
So where do you now come in to step that down or to check that?
Right, so we would come in once we believe that what your conduct is price gouging under the law. If we think the price is unconscionable, it's unjustifiable, we would look. And it's not that simple. What determines if something is price gouging is not the sticker price. It really comes down to circumstances and margin. And so sometimes the gouging is not even occurring at the retail end. It could be from the manufacturer, it could be from the supplier or the distributor in the middle of it. And so take, for instance, if a retailer generally has a business model where 45% is their general margin, and they maintain that model across the board in other products, but for instance, at the time of a pandemic like this, something is touted as a potentially efficacious therapy against the virus. And for that particular item or such items, you can see that the margin goes to what? 300, 400%. And so you've already organized your business to be able to operate in a manner that you're satisfied with at 60% margin. Prior to when this problem occurred, even that item went at that 60% margin. After the problem occurred, during the pendency of the problem, your other products continued at the 60% margin. But this one went up. And there are still a few things you're going to look at. For instance, he's going to need to restock. And then the pricing of something is not that simple. And so you're going to look at the inventory price, the list price at which you purchased. You're also going to look at the price at which you're going to restock. And somewhere in there is a fair assessment of pricing. And so when we allege price gouging, we don't know yet. But when we establish price gouging, it's because we have looked at the totality of everything.
So what would it take to get to the bottom of this, to establish that, hey, this is gouging, this is not right?
Evidence.
Yes.
Evidence. And it's a very evidentiary based type of analysis. And so for
evidence from who?
From our investigation, including material that we pull. So I'll give you an example. So using the hydroxychloroquine and the pharmacies that have come within investigation. One of the things we need to look at if we were going to prosecute this in court is first we've got to show the circumstantial evidence that establishes the basis for that conduct. And that is pretty open. You've got a pandemic, you've got a societal expectation and linkage between the item that we're discussing with the cure or the pandemic. So that's evidence that there's a shock to the market. Remember that when there's a shock to the market, it's no longer, price is something that is negotiated in a free market by supply, with demand and supply.
Yes.
But when there's a shock to the market is no longer a free market. It's now a distorted market. So you establish that the market is distorted. How do you establish the market is distorted? You show what the item is, in this case, this medication. You show what the prevailing public health emergency is. You show a linkage between that medication and that public health emergency. Then you now go to now show the internal mechanism of the target of investigation or the defendant if you were prosecuting. And so in this case, you pull up a pharmacy that was selling at 50,000, for instance.
Yes.
Look at how much they'd been selling. You look at when they started selling at a different price. You look at their entire business model. You look at what they consider the right profit margin for them as a business. We don't determine that for them. And then you put all of this together. You look at what cost they received the supply they were selling.
Yes.
You look at what cost they're going to restock that supply. And in all of that, you would be able to put together a tapestry of conduct, which you would present before a court. And if the court feels your case is compelling, it might return a verdict in your favor, meaning, conviction.
How long would this process take? It sounds like a stretch.
It depends. The scope of an investigation would depend first on the nature of the target of the investigation. And so for organizations that have better record keeping, it's easier because you can literally pull up their records.
Yes.
You can see how long they've been selling. And then for organizations that don't have good record keeping, sometimes when the increase is just about marginal and is neither here nor there. So it depends on many things.
Okay.
And also depends on the capacity of the investigator, the human talents that you have, their knowledge about this, and then sometimes even the cooperation of the targets of investigation.
Talking about capacity, you seem to be like a one-man army.
In actual fact, I'm not even a one-man army. I'm just a member of an integrated army. And I have a team. Do we need more people? Yes. But am I comfortable and confident of the team I have? Absolutely. These people work extremely hard, whether as investigators or as counsel. But what I have discovered, and this has nothing to do with the FCCPC, is that if you're knowledgeable about the work you do, one of the most important things is for you to truly, really participate in the work.
Yes.
Because of your role in leadership, just by default, people will take the work far more seriously when you're part of it. And people who need to respond also take you more seriously if they see you in front of it. And so participating strongly is not an indication of a weakness of the internal mechanisms of the institution. It's more a prioritization of what the issues are and a signal to industry about how seriously we take these things. To a lesser extent, though, it's also a resource issue. For instance, I have a budget of 2 million naira per annum for legal fees. And you're proceeding against large corporations and multinationals who would afford 20 million naira for their senior advocates and their lawyers. And I'm a trial lawyer myself, so I might as well. And so those are some of the reasons.
Okay. Now, Nigerians have a high level of consumers, and this comes with lots of complaints, and you had talked about that earlier on, but just to shed more light on it, what is the strategy for handling, such complaints when they come? And then again, for people who lose their cases, going to court and all of that, how do you handle that?
So I'm pretty certain that our current complaint resolution model is not a winning model, and it is not sustainable. In the climate that we're in, almost everybody who has a problem goes to the FCCPC. In many respects, the FCCPC has become a multi-company customer service desk. And what I've said to many companies is that you have outsourced resolving complaints between your customer and yourself to the federal government, and the federal government is paying for resolving your complaints, in the sense that the first place people should go is to the company. A regulator should become a secondary level complaint resolution authority. And many people now think that the FCCPC is a complaint resolution place.
So they come directly to
complaints,
you.
but that's not even supposed to be the most important thing we do. And so we are doing everything we can. We've leveraged technology. As a matter of fact, our complaint resolution unit, sadly, is the unit that has the most number of people within the organization. But I know for sure, and we're working towards it, that the best place to be is to get companies to resolve complaints primarily, and when it doesn't resolve, and secondarily, we would step in. We're doing a lot of things to get that done.
So when people come to you first, do you refer them back to their company or back to the organization they're complaining about for them to take it up first? And if it's not resolved?
No, because that in itself is part of a failure of a system where the consumer is basically just throwing the consumer around. So what we do is we immediately engage the company. And so essentially we take the role, become custodians of the resolution process. And so the file is open, the complaint is an open item with us until it is resolved.
What challenges do you face when that happens?
Extremely difficult.
Paint a picture.
So I'll give you a quick picture. So you buy a can of carbonated soft drink. It's a short fill. You're not necessarily injured by it, but you're upset. You didn't get value for money. You look on that can, you don't even know where to go. There's nothing about that company that tells you who to call when you're dissatisfied. And so you go, there's an app. I can complain to the FCCPC. So you complain to the FCCPC. That can of carbonated soft drink costs you 150 naira. I'm going to write a letter by snail mail to the butler in Lagos from Abuja. And so the delivery of that letter alone is 3,000 naira. The butler is going to look at my letter, it's going to come into a pile of letters, so you go through maybe to the MD, if I signed it, or go to some director of quality assurance, before the letter finds its way all the way through to the complaint resolution people. And so the first thing those ones might do is like, might call the consumer and say, we're sorry about this, we'll give you 6 cases in exchange. I don't know that has been resolved. I have an open file.
Yes.
And then when it's 30, 45 days, I'm going to write the company again saying, there's a complaint that you haven't resolved.
So there's a disconnect.
So there's
somewhere.
a disconnect. Sometimes a company might even dispute the account of the consumer. And so it becomes contentious. And so you're going back and forth a little more time. All of these instances could be far better resolved if the consumer if the company created a mechanism that was easily accessible and known to the consumer, and the consumer could go straight to that mechanism and only comes to us when it doesn't resolve at that level.
So do you have a platform where you relate to a whole lot of these companies, these organizations, for structure, for procedures in this regard?
So that's one of the first things I started working on when I took on the role, and it took quite a while to build that technology. And so the technology is not at the point where it's in phases, but now we've got the portal for complaints, we've got the app also, and what we've done is to create it in such a way that companies have to plug in. You have to subscribe to it and plug into it. So right on the app, right on the portal, you can literally identify the company you have a complaint against. Once you've done that, as it drops, the company is getting a copy of it. We have a dashboard, we're seeing what's happening, we see what the company has and what is unresolved, and so the company gets real-time notice of its customers' aggravations. And so we're watching their resolution process, and we would step in if a certain timeline passes and they haven't stepped in and haven't resolved it. And so we've got quite a number of the companies that have plugged into it, and but it still requires a lot more for many of the companies to plug into it.
Are there penalties for companies that are not plugged into this?
No. There are no penalties for not plugging into it, but what it is that companies that are plugged into it will get periodic information and training from us. We're able to analyze how they're doing or how they're not doing and engage them on how to do things better. So they're going to get a benefit of the doubt when something goes wrong. And secondly, for those who are plugged in, there's a time issue. They're able to quickly get on things and resolve it. For those who are not plugged in, we will not extend the time.
Yes.
You would still have to resolve the complaints within appropriate time, and you'd have to report back to us. For those who are plugged in, you don't need to file reports because we can see it. And so there's an incentive to plug in. It's not necessarily punitive.
So how would the average consumer, just a regular consumer, get to know of this?
We're doing that, but the reality of some of these things, it's really, it's almost like saying the taste of the pudding is in the eating. For instance, about a couple of weeks ago, someone tried the app. Had a problem with an appliance he bought and had been having the runaround for over a year, and finally said, you know what, let me get in touch with FCCPC. Didn't know how to, went to Google, discovered that there was an app, downloaded the app, complained on the app, About an hour and a half later, the company calls in and says, why did you complain against us to the FCCPC? We would resolve the problem now. And
that was it.
In 24 hours, problem was resolved. 88% more people than had the app before have downloaded the app to their telephones.
Okay.
So with each success story, people would get to know it better. But with respect to sensitization, that's another key area of our work,
yes.
Consumer education. Again, companies are missing in action. I mean, consumer education is a line item on my budget. And prior to when I got there, the vast majority of consumer education was going to the market, doing some road shows, printing flyers.
Yes.
Maybe a few billboards and buses and all of that. But think about it. How many flyers can you really print with your limited budget? In how many languages? And as few as the flyers we could print were, so even if you printed 1 million flyers, you don't have the money. But even if you had the money to print 1 million flyers, there's nothing. But you know what is even worse? After you've printed that 1 million flyers, we still don't have the channel to move 1 million flyers out. And so companies must take a role in sensitization. They have done the research and development in advertisements. They know exactly how to get their products into homes across the country. They know how to make your child tug at your pants until you buy something for them. And so they must use that vehicle also
Yes.
to advise consumers of their rights,
So this
including the resolution mechanism.
All right, let's go for a break. You are on to FireWorks. We will be back shortly.